Affective deprivation. We know that love is one of the elements that brings us the most fulfillment, but being something complex, it also brings great frustrations. One of them is affective deprivation. It's impossible to have an idea that doesn't echo in the emotional world, just as it's impossible to have an object that doesn't cast shadows. When light is cast upon it, there will be a shadow. All emotional phenomena are like labels attached to ideas. This is an important element, and we will return to this point later. It's crucial to know to which ideas our emotional phenomena are linked. To understand when they are unpleasant, to discover which mental format sustains them, to realize that thought is behind them, sponsoring those emotions. Then we talk about the need for expression of our feelings and the creation of bonds. Marcus Aurelius, a great Roman Stoic philosopher, says at a certain point in his work, men were made for each other, educate them or endure them. This could spark a ton of reflections, but not too relevant to the topic, so I'll focus on the idea that men are made for each other. Indeed, man is a social being. He needs to relate. He completes, expands, and amplifies his possibilities when working in a group. He even manages to overcome one of the greatest obstacles to his fulfillment, which is selfishness, by expanding and creating bonds with as many people as he can. The idea is that one day, we will have bonds with all of humanity. The erroneous assumptions of affective deprivation. First thing, the difficulty of loving and valuing oneself. This love, which I should have for myself but don't for some reason, whether it's a past experience or a mistaken conception of life someone else, has to supply this love I don't have for myself. So in a healthy, normal relationship between two people, each would have a portion of love to give to the other. This portion isn't enough because I need you to fill me up, since I can't fill myself. Therefore, this distorted self-image, a certain contempt, a complex of inferiority, a bunch of factors, lead us to want the other to provide the love we should give to ourselves. This is a very present element in affective deprivation. Another very important element is our inability to distribute our love across everything we do. Humans need to relate, to find a point of connection with the world around them. This relationship makes us, in a way, leave a piece of our heart in everything we touch. Everything we touch turns to gold, like King Midas, leaving an imprint of our heart on everything. Imagine a person who loves where they live, loves their street, their community, their city, loves what they do, loves their co-workers. They expand and practice this ability to love to such an extent that it becomes very difficult to feel deprived. Everywhere they go, they leave the imprint of their heart. As Sri Ram says, you must lose your heart every day and then seek it. Here is something strange about affective deprivation. It causes a person to close their heart, isolate themselves, and hoard all that affection to pour it into one person who becomes the one designated to supply all the affection they need. This results in disproportionate affection, like a light beam emitted in 360 degrees, but all focused into a single ray, a laser beam. Of course, this pierces anyone who stands in its way. It's suffocating, desperate, making the relationship somewhat unhealthy, a disproportionate amount of feeling for a single individual while ignoring the rest of the body. Life becomes cold, indifferent. You no longer want to be with anyone, nor be anywhere. Only this person becomes the source of all happiness and fulfillment. Clearly, if this person is not relating to the world in the same way, likes the world, wants to be with it, this can become a burden. So this person doesn't distribute love. They concentrate it and suffocate it like a laser beam. Another erroneous assumption is here is no inner life. If here is no inner life, T here is no internal approval for what we do. We're dependent on external approval and need people to constantly endorse what we do because we have no internal endorsement. Imagine what it's like for a great artist throughout history. T here is a common element. Rarely did an artist gain recognition during their lifetime. Some did, but very late. Most of their lives were spent creating something that no one approved of. Why did they continue? Why did they persist? Because something inside them validated it. Something internal gave them the stamp of approval, saying, "It's right, keep going." That's inner life, the ability to retreat, elevate your consciousness, find yourself, and make it seem just, valid, and good in your own eyes. With that internal endorsement, a person continues regardless of the world. Perhaps the world will only understand their work 100 years later, 1,000 years later, or maybe never. But they feel aligned with life. They feel in harmony with themselves. They have an inner life, a way of endorsing their actions, and are far less dependent on what others think. Affective deprivation has this element. We lack internal endorsement and inner life. Another significant element of affective deprivation is the lack of a clear sense of purpose. The sense of purpose is hierarchical about life's meaning, hierarchical and territorial. It needs to be something that motivates us. Imagine how a person can get out of bed every day feeling motivated if that day isn't a brick in a building they already envision complete. It's like an architect's blueprint. Every day, the construction manager and their team first look at the blueprint, at the future, and begin to dig foundations and build what's required for today while keeping an eye on the future. How difficult, even impossible, would it be for the construction manager to work without knowing where they're heading with it, without the blueprint, the future, or a clear visualization of goals? This small thinking, not believing in oneself, this reduction in consciousness that deprivation causes, and how much it limits us, will make it hard for us to have a good reason to get out of bed in the morning. Without this purpose, the days become a terrible monotony, needing external stimuli, extra love, to motivate us to take another step. So one of the elements we can perceive, though it's a strong word, is that affective deprivation can lead to what feels like an energy vampirist constantly needing the other to save, rescue, or pull them out of the storm. At some point, we must learn to swim. This is unbearable. We can't live rescuing others. Sometimes we need to be rescued too. We want a relationship that's harmonious and reciprocal. Remember Nietzsche's interesting phrase, "My solitude can only be exchanged for good company. Otherwise, I prefer solitude." We need to be cautious about this. A healthy relationship is one of exchange, but deprivation makes this relationship impossible, destabilizing the balance. In The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield says that humans organize themselves according to two orientations, hierarchical and territorial. The hierarchical orientation involves constantly looking up at those above and down at those below, always watching so that those below don't surpass them, and striving to reach the level of superiors. They live in constant concern about what others think. They don't attend to their own soul's needs, but are always trying to meet the demands of others. He says that this is unbearable for someone who wants to create art. Pressfield speaks of inspiration, the muses. The hierarchical orientation profanes the muses. It's possible that someone may succeed this way, but in the end, they lose because they sold their muse, sold their inspiration. This doesn't lead to true creation in any field. Pressfield proposes another way of living, the territorial orientation. This is very much like the middle path in many traditional classical works. What is territorial orientation? You find fulfillment, let's say, by playing the piano. You practice tirelessly, reach a level of mastery that satisfies you. That's your territory. If you have any trouble, where do you find energy? From your piano. If you are struggling, you don't call 10 people to ask for their opinion. You go to your piano. He mentions a gymnast if they face a life challenge. where do they turn? To their gym, their apparatus, the place they usually train. Your territory is like a battery. You've invested your best in it, and when you need energy, you return there, and it gives you back what you invested. It has nothing to do with others or what they think. This is your territory. You reign there, you leave your best, and when you feel insecure, that's where you go to find yourself. When someone suffers from affective deprivation, they cannot think in terms of territorial orientation. Affective deprivation empties and pushes you outward. All your affirmation comes from external crutches, not from your own spine. You need external support, because T here is nothing truly yours to rely on. This leaves a person feeling drained, naturally leading to a constant state of unhappiness. So remember this story about territorial orientation and how it would give us autonomy, how we wouldn't need anything else to be happy. We won't stop considering others in terms of giving, but we won't have expectations that they return anything to us. That's the ideal. That we always have constant generosity, but without expecting anything in return, because if we do, it's not generosity, it's a trade, a transaction. This takes away the legitimacy of true generosity. Scarcity and selfishness have a close relationship. I want others to give me a sense of life. I want others to give me motivation. I want others to recognize me, value me, love me. And what do I want to give? What do I want to add to the life of the other? What do I want to contribute to humanity? Because it is said that every human being came to the world to pronounce a musical note, as if the world were a symphony. To make their contribution, I am a person who cancels myself and lives for others, expecting them to be the center of my life. You don't find the center of your life outside of yourself. It's inside. Everything that's missing to be happy is within me. The other can walk beside me, but they can't give me what I don't find in myself. We are the other half of the same coin. That's not true. If you want to create a bond with someone, you have to be a complete link so that the other complete link connects with you. We have to be whole beings if we want to have mature and deep relationships of giving, wanting the other to grow without expectations. A good relationship requires beings of integrity who do not complete each other but walk parallel. So it's a very important element to consider. There is a good dose of selfishness within scarcity. If we look back, it is somewhat vampirizing. It is definitely not what we could call love. Sometimes, when we leave a somewhat unhealthy relationship, we realize that it wasn't love, it was just scarcity. And sometimes, it leads to highly complicated, difficult, and problematic relationships. Another thing we can consider within scarcity, still associated with this idea of selfishness, is that at a certain moment, when a person lacks self-love, respect, and self-consideration, they feel as though life is not worth living unless someone comes to rescue them. Notice that everything in life gives us a double opportunity. You can choose to become someone with terrible emotional dependency and want to be dragged along for life. Well, at the same point, if my life is worth nothing, I could choose an act of great generosity. If my life is worth nothing, it's like a plate of food, a nice, healthy plate of food. If I don't want it because I am not hungry, it's very selfish to throw it in the trash. Donate it to someone. Humanity is full of hungry people. That is, if my life is worth nothing to me, why not give it away? Why not start distributing my energy to those who need it? A generous person rarely feels scarcity because by giving so much, they fill themselves. We can perceive that scarcity is a selfish option, sometimes in the face of existential emptiness. Generosity is an altruistic option, but in response to the same stimulus. Existential emptiness can lead you to selfishness, or it can lead you to generosity. Another element worth considering. Don't think that scarcity or any other emotional phenomenon is devoid of an idea behind it. It's not a feeling. No way. Behind it, there is an idea, usually a mistaken one, forged by a distorted worldview born from some traumatic situation, whatever it may be. There is an idea behind this. If, at a certain moment, you distance yourself from the stimulus and look at this situation in a cold, mental way, emotions are hot and the mind is cold. You can discover what the mental sponsor of that emotion is. It's this thought, "I don't agree with it," and change the mental sponsor of your emotions. "I think I am a very inferior person," but that's not true. Therefore, I won't allow myself this kind of thought. The mind is faster than emotions. Notice that. When I think, "My friend did something wrong to me," to hear is a fraction of a second before I feel anger or hurt. In that fraction of a second, you can act mentally faster. No, not this, and replace it with something positive. Quickly. Don't accept that kind of mental form and replace it with something positive before it echoes in the emotional. The emotional is slower and harder to clean. The emotional is like a can of paint that's been spilled. A deep anger, a deep hurt, sometimes takes a whole day, a whole week, or even a lifetime to clean. So before wrong thoughts echo in the emotional and spill the can of paint, you can banish them. Put a mental rule. "I don't accept thinking like this." Put a positive mental form in its place. Something you like. Something more elevated, healthier. It's like you've stopped a ball's play. This doesn't come in, and you replace it with something positive. Of course, it's said that the universe is circular, and this mental form will rotate and come back to you. But it will find you much stronger. It will find you more resistant every time. So it's about thinking about what's behind negative emotional forms. You need to find a different posture, change your position. The mind doesn't stop. The mind doesn't rest. We're scattered in every direction, so every time we look, we don't learn everything life is trying to show us. That is, this mental reflection I am proposing is to stop a little, sit still, and look at your emotional scarcity problem from your higher principles and see that they are a shadow of a distorted object, and no longer accept the presence of this distorted object in your mental plane. Deep down, it's mental muscle, a bit of training to master your own mind. Remember that inner life is control of the mind. Notice that if we stop moving so much and look at our problem from a higher point of view, we'll see that scarcity is poorly supported. So dignity and modesty are very important elements to develop. I am not weak. I had a fall, but I'll get up. I am not frail. I am not at the bottom of the pit. I slipped a bit, but I can still perfectly reach the edge. Not wanting to worsen your emotional situation. Not enjoying feeling weak. The ode to frailty is terrible for channeling willpower with that identity. It's an identity that undermines any possibility of reaction. Will is like a funnel. You enter problems in various ways, but to exit, you must channel the willpower. T here is no way. It doesn't matter how I entered. To get out, I have to aim for the future wanting to leave, and have discipline, resilience, and character for that. In other words, will. Seeing yourself as weak or pitiful definitely doesn't help. Have some modesty, as Plato used to say. He said modesty is positive. Shame is negative, but modesty is positive. When we make certain mistakes and feel ashamed of them, it means that there is still some sense. T, here is some character. When we expose our mistakes on display, modesty is gone. Then it's difficult. Then it's a serious moral wound and much harder to reverse. Often, emotional scarcity comes from past problems. There are numerous situations, childhood traumas, sometimes serious traumas, and I don't think it's wrong for someone to want to know why they had these problems, why they feel scarcity, where it is grounded in terms of past facts. But be careful, because turning only to the outside and to the past, asking who did something to me and when, doesn't necessarily give you strength to do what is necessary, which is to turn inside. Channel your will and look to the future and say, "It doesn't matter how I got here, but I'll go there. That's my destination." Sometimes, looking too much to the past makes you find scapegoats and become complacent in the face of the future. Your mistakes continue, and you say, "Well, but this wasn't my fault. It was so and so's fault. I am the victim." You'll never recover, and when someone points out your defects, you'll say, "But it was the other." That is, looking for scapegoats instead of looking for a way out of our problem, because we don't want to be that. It's not healthy. This issue of analysis focused on the past and synthesis aimed at the future is important, and it's necessary to balance these two elements. Be careful with extremes. When we see that a person doesn't react, it's not good to blame others for them being the way they are. It's good to say that it doesn't matter how you got here, but what matters is that you have to get there. And that depends only on you, regardless of where these problems came from in the past. Obviously, when scarcity develops to the point of depression, which is another complex issue, you may indeed need a multidisciplinary team to assist you with that. But that doesn't relieve the obligation to stay motivated towards the future, to build the will to reach the future. It will take time, it will need support for sure, but the way out remains in that direction. People can ease our pain, but propelling us toward the future is something we all have to do for ourselves. And for that, we need to channel our will. So it's important to balance these two elements. Analysis focused on the past and synthesis aimed at the future. Unattended scarcity is the progressive corrosion of willpower, and it can reach a pathological level, and it often does. Just look at the situations surrounding us in the current world. With certain untreated disturbances in the psychic realm, they reach pathological levels more quickly, and cases are becoming more and more numerous. We need to recognize when we lose the thread of common sense, when we lose possession of ourselves, when we're dramatizing, when we have a certain masochism of enjoying being bad, of being small, of being pampered, coddled, and served by everyone. Be aware. No one will tell you that you have this. You need to notice it within yourself. Another element, and the lack of affection that generates scarcity. But sometimes excess too. Excess of affection, excess of attention. We need to notice when we're misadjusting, whether it's the child, the partner, or anyone. We need to notice when we're misadjusting this person to life. So just as the lack of affection, excess can also create a chronic feeling of scarcity in the future. Pay attention to that. As the Stoics said, nothing in excess. Stop being fragile. No one can conform to being fragile throughout life. We see numerous men who were born with physical weaknesses, numerous problems, and did grand things. It's not fair for someone to settle with any frailty. Act on it. Either you learn to live with it or you overcome it, but don't settle with the image that it must be carried for the rest of your life. This, we could say without much doubt, undermines a healthy relationship. And if it undermines the healthy, what will it generate? A range of unhealthy relationships where one feels dependent and sometimes grabs someone who exploits this situation. It's the story of wanting to be loved at any cost. A person with emotional scarcity has this. The thing I want most is for someone to love me, so I'll pay any price. Everything is worth it. Develops illusions about the partner, develops fantasies, develops undignified situations because I need to be loved. So choosing without criteria, you get involved with companions who often do not have the maturity for a relationship, or people who don't have basic character. That is, you are asking to be exploited. It's a trap to be avoided.